This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again Dr. Buck Milton. Buck, you know, I think you're getting a little sensitive when I bring up your aspirations for the Bryce Prize.
I am not.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
I am not. And besides,
and I hope
you attempted to bribe me on television.
Really?
And that's an impeachable offense.
Oh, is it? I mean,
Yes.
I just like to be an ambassador to someplace with a nice beach, and I think that's a common desire after these national political contests.
Yes.
A number of people do find themselves as ambassadors in places with nice beaches.
Really?
Is that right? I think they do that.
Well, that
yes.
wouldn't possibly happen.
I think it's a little political payoff. Lucky,
that
but I
couldn't.
don't want to talk too much about
I
that.
cannot believe that would happen.
Oh, I hope American people can handle
yes.
it. Well,
So.
I hope I could get one, maybe with your help. But so I'll criticize them.
Will you contribute to my legal defense fund?
Well, I don't know. I have to think about
You'll
it.
get yours, and then
I'll get into it.
yours.
Well, okay. So we're having our conversation, which I think has been pretty interesting.
Yes.
We've discussed the American and French revolutions and the slogans that came out of the French Revolution, which were liberty, equality, and fraternity. And we've spoken some about liberty and some about equality. And maybe tonight we can talk about fraternity. Now, let's see. Fraternity, is that like sorority as a fraternity? They used the word in what way in the French Revolution? It was brotherhood, or you want to comment about that?
It's funny. We were talking fraternities and sororities. We are taping this on a college campus, so
yes.
that readily comes to mind. And then just before we started rolling, I started thinking about other words. So there's frater, the soror, and then there's patria. The fatherland,
the country,
patriotism is the root word is patria. And it strikes me that in the French Revolution, up to that point, the hierarchical nature of, for instance, the church, or, for instance, the patria, the fatherland, you look upward. It's a vertical thing. You've got a single head at the top, and he looks out for you and dispenses largesse and protects you and defends you. Whereas fraternity, you're looking horizontally. You're looking to others of your same station. And I think that's very interesting. And going back to our episode, a couple of episodes ago when we were talking about liberty, we were focusing in a lot on Thomas Jefferson. And I mentioned how Jefferson, in a way that's very distinct from myself, Jefferson saw the French Revolution as the continuation of the American Revolution. I don't know if you've seen the John Adams miniseries. It's an outstanding miniseries by HBO, very faithful to the real events. And at one point, Jefferson and Adams are in a pub having a drink, and they are starting to split. They're starting to have very strong differences. And finally, in an attempt to back off of this tension that's built between them, and their harsh words, Jefferson lifts his glass and says, "Well, to the revolution." And of course, the French Revolution is underway at that point. And Adams rolls his eyes a bit, and he says, "Which one?" And Jefferson loses it again. He says, "John, they are one and the same. Don't you see that?" Well, I don't. Jefferson did. But the idea of fraternity is globalism. It's internationalism. That one of the artificial chains for Rousseau that had been created was this idea of nationalism, of patria. That these are artificial barriers between the universal brotherhood of man. And that's one of the things that needs to be done away with. And I think Jefferson would certainly have agreed with that. I think Rousseau would have agreed with that. The French revolutionary leaders, Robespierre, I think, certainly Saint-Just, certainly agreed with that. The idea that this revolution needs to be expanded beyond French borders, it needs to be internationalized, that the enemy is not England, the enemy is the aristocracy of any country, and that the true fraternity, the fraternity, is of the common man wherever he may be.
Yes, and so you can make the case with the American Revolution. I mean, Jefferson may have had that opinion, but American exceptionalism sort of plays itself out in a way, and then disentanglement from anywhere. So it wasn't as if there was a big effort to have a revolution in Mexico and, I let everyone, I don't know, all the people that live there have the same kind of thing. So the American Revolution was more of an insular one, more connected with North America, and the French Revolution it's where the match was dropped, and it's right in the middle of almost, I'd say, post-feudal Europe. I mean, the aristocrats were everywhere. No one could vote. There were very strict social orders. The church controlled things. And so the idea of trying to undo that on an international sort of post-national way was the effort. And I'll make this case. The same thing happened, and I'll draw some parallels if I can. The same thing happened with the Russian Revolution,
yes,
which created the Union of Socialist Soviet Republics, and it was a funny relationship between Russia and the ideals of communism.
Yes.
So communism was an international kind of thing.
Indeed, it was.
And the Soviet Union played itself out on the artifices of the old Russian Empire, the Tsar. So all the land the Tsar had conquered became part of this new political construction. But the geopolitical interest of the ruling group in Moscow was to play its sort of big power deal the way the Russians had always played it out. So it was a funny kind of mixture of those two ambitions, and which I think was in the Cold War. So the Russians, if you hear that, the Russians, the communists, they're people that are basically out there, and if you're a communist, you might have a view of changing the social order, but actually you're an agent of a foreign power. So this is a foreign power that's fighting as foreign powers do with each other, and this is just like being an agent of Nazi Germany or anyone or Japan,
yes,
in World War II, threatening the U.S. So the similar kind of thing. Well, maybe with France and the revolution, they tried to spread it everywhere. They tossed people out. They did that. They did this. But the idea was really France dominating Europe the way that the French kings never could. And Napoleon, it's another funny part of this story, is Napoleon marched out to conquer the world, and basically was putting his relatives on different thrones of different places, and called himself emperor. And so, in a crazy way, he flipped over to the old style here, kind of an animal farm kind of thing, playing itself out there.
Took the words right out of my mouth.
So an animal farm playing itself out with the way the deal goes, and the fraternity that was there, that universal thing, it's very intoxicating kind of thing. And the Russian Revolution, the communists have the same thing. The Internationale is such a powerful song, and the words in it are quite powerful. I mean, the idea is that, which was the national anthem of the Soviet Union. So it was kind of the idea that we're going to make the world great, one place. And the French still attempt to do that. I will say, I'll get into this a little bit, is there are different ways that France and America respond to the forces in each society that mitigate against brotherhood, that mitigate against it. And I think maybe we could sail the ship into the American situation and our necessity for brotherhood in a difficult situation. The way the French do that is they treat everyone the same, or they attempt to. So the idea is we're all brothers and we're all equal. So we're not going to pay any of the courts of law. No one pays any attention to skin color, ethnic origins, anything. It's the way it's all 1, 2, 3, and there's no difference between people from North Africa or anywhere. That's the ideal, and in the U.S. we play it a somewhat different way. And I'll let you speak at this point on this subject.
Yes, let me back up a bit, because you got to Animal Farm just before I did. We'd already spoken of 1984. Let's take, since we've gotten into the 20th century, let's compare communism for a minute with National Socialism. One way you can look at this as National Socialism, the Nazis, Germany, versus International Socialism of the Soviet Union. And I think as between the leaders of those two countries, the Nazis were a lot more intellectually honest. Their version of socialism was, there is fraternity, but only fraternity among our ethnic group, the Aryan race. And if you are not a member of this group genetically, you don't count, you're out, you're animals, we can do anything we wish to you. The Soviet Union paid lip service to internationalism, and there certainly were many true believers, I think, those who really did believe in internationalism and international fraternity and international Marxism. But the leaders in Animal Farm style very often didn't believe in it. Stalin was very nationalistic, of course, during World War II, and the rest of the time, take Stalin, take Castro, they give the image of being men of the people.
Yes.
But their dachas, their private living
I think
arrangements,
Stalin had 30 hours.
were much more equal than
Yes,
the rest of the animals. So,
which is the normal way things go.
Yes.
Well, I'll make this comment about at least the ideal of fraternity would mean, and so it's a quite Christian or religious idea, is that we're all sort of brothers and sisters. We should love each other and not injure each other, and no matter what. And that's sort of a great ideal. And I would say a big part of the human brain goes along with that. And so that's very hardwired in our brains. At least that other things are there too. But that's one part of it, is that we'd like to have that we'd like to live in a country like that.
Yes.
And it makes it easier to live in such a country if, I start out with this, the genetic structure is homogeneous, the belief systems are homogeneous, the history is homogeneous, and there's few differences possible. It makes it easier to do it. So, I mean, I just say it's a little easier to get to that sense of fraternity if those conditions are met. If they're not met, it's certainly possible to do it, but I think it makes it harder. And that's to appreciate the difficulties of doing that. It is a lot. Many times another thing that causes this group solidarity would be an external enemy. So often people feel the most like brothers and sisters when they're confronted with some kind of tremendous external enemy that they all have to struggle against. So you could sometimes see this on science fiction stories that, I don't know, there's some kind of abandoned, I don't know, truck stop, and these people of different classes show up there and they're threatened by zombies or whatever they're threatened by, and they all really become brothers and sisters. They cling together no matter what their circumstances are. In war, I think that's really those are out there. But one of the things to do to parse this out is to say, yes, this is a really good thing to do, and how hard you have to work in different countries to make it happen. And the way the French promote this is there's no differentiation of people of anywhere, one up, down, anywhere. We're all going to the same. We don't. Our census does not specify, I don't know, whatever, skin color, nationality. We just don't do that. Everybody is the same. But in the U.S. story is in attempting to promote fraternity and brotherhood. The idea is that we're going to basically treat people as in different categories. And in fact, in the United States, there's tremendous differences in people that live here. And in fact, this is, I guess, trumpeted, the idea of diversity, as much as diversity as possible. So, yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of things to be said about diversity. There is, and there's some real positive things attached to it. But one of the things that at least we should consider is the difficulties of establishing this sort of saintly notion of brotherhood where we can all embrace one another. If everyone may have a different language, different beliefs, different religions, different national histories, different opinions about everything you could think about, tossed in together, and then with the state attempting to allocate resources. So the state's going to give resources to one group or not another, or take resources away from one group. That seems to be a method of disaster.
Yes.
But that seems to be where really, if we'd like to have brotherhood, particularly in our present decade, it's a spooky situation.
Yes. Well, I think that a lot of the attempts at fraternity by people either who genuinely believe in it but don't quite understand it, or by people who are hypocrites and simply attempting to use the system. True fraternity, for instance, the idea of the Soviet Union, or the common enemy, that's even better. If you say, yes, we are all brothers, and the thing that makes us brothers is that we have a common enemy over there, well, if the common enemy are other human beings, then that's a self-defeating position to take. I think the idea of fraternity truly must be international and global, and not tribal. And you really don't see people live up to that. Once again, I think the Nazis were the most intellectually honest, and I'm not approving of the Nazis by any sense, but the point is they were not hypocrites. They made no bones about it. All Aryans are brothers, and Slavs and Poles and Jews and Gypsies and blacks are subhuman, and therefore they don't fit into the community of man, and they can be exterminated without any moral problems whatsoever. That's wrong. The premises are wrong. But if you accept the premises, they acted publicly and perfectly consistently with that. Whereas if you say all men are brothers and we are all in this together and we will all live happily ever after, if we simply eliminate some human beings, the rich or the capitalists or whoever, that's a completely internally inconsistent statement. How can you have license for killing your brother and still say he's your brother? What good is fraternity in that case?
Well, good. I like it that we've sailed the ship in this direction, because I think it's an important dilemma the world has right now, with 8 billion people here on our small little speck of I don't know, whatever we'd call our planet here. A little,
the pale blue dot.
It's just an insignificant bit of
yes.
a bit of I don't know, cosmic detritus, or just floating around out there, just nothing in the middle of whatever, with this extraordinary life form on it that sprang from one root very recently. Mm-hmm. So in fact, if you look at the human population and you go back, let's take it back 100,000 years, maybe 200,000. I mean, or even let's go back. Let's make it 3 million. So what's happened is, at least this would be the scientific view, I think I could say this, there are all these hominids that tried things. Their brains became big, they had hands, they tried this, they tried that, and many of them were destroyed by just circumstances. So finally, our Homo sapiens arose several 100,000 years ago in Africa, and they had great qualities. Probably the biggest was speech. So they could communicate pretty easily, they could have social organisms, and they could use their collective power to overcome everything, and they did that, and they gradually expanded. And one of the events that took, with often almost periods of extinction. I think there was one 70,000 years ago, things were almost rendered extinct by volcanoes. We had this lots, and many times our species would go, so they travel somewhere and they would they would become extinct. So I don't know, a band of 1,000 people leaves, they encounter hard times, and a time later they're all gone, they're all dead. And so we have this complicated world out there, struggling, taking place. And then finally, you could make the analogy, one brother shook another brother's hand and said, well, I'm headed out, and I'm going to travel to wherever I travel to. And a substantial number went to Europe, and then many people stayed in Africa. They're there, and so time passes, and then one brother returns on horseback and, I don't know, richly armored, and the other brother, the descendant of the brother, is basically in the same state of nature as 70,000 years ago. And then one brother enslaves the brothers left behind. We have all these complexities about how humans have responded with each other. But if you had a true sense of brotherhood, it makes the nation state sort of an oxymoron in a way. I mean, for our small little planet here, with all these things taking place, these national boundaries could be construed as artificial. You could say that, and you could say, well, this is our country and whatever, but is it? And if we have this huge population changes, redistribution of world power? So the advantages the U.S. have had is basically, in many ways, based on its geopolitical size and its access to science and the fruits of science. And so we've had a real heads up everywhere. And however, the only thing that gives us this head up is our access to knowledge. And then if other countries or other places can obtain the knowledge we have, they can excel us, they can go past that, and that seems to be what's occurring. So we have this potential world conflict that's out there. And one of the most important things, I think, would be to at least understand these tensions that occur and the necessity for some kind of brotherhood. And then the other thing to say is, I tried to make the point, it's a very difficult thing to accomplish. It's not easy to get there. It's in many ways, it's against our psychological balance. And it's an ethical thing. I'm going to take food from my family and in a completely equal fashion, give it to some person that's different than I am, I can't even know anything about, but we're going to have this redistribution of resources for a higher good, some kind of higher reason. Very hard to accomplish that, isn't it?
Yes. Well, it's tribalism, and this is the tension. Nationalism and internationalism, I think both have a claim on our experience, on our genes, on our biology, and it depends which one's pull is stronger on which individual at which particular time. But they are at war with each other. You can see interests that we have in common. You can see things that are not common to us. And our built-in suspicion, going back to that lizard brain, the thing that keeps us alive, the thing that assesses threats. All right, what if I'm generous and I spread knowledge and your tribe gets it, and I'm fine with that, but then your tribe is not generous. I'm being internationalist and you're being nationalist. I'm being fraternal, you're being tribal, and you use what I've given you to destroy me.
Yes.
And so if I start thinking this way, then I'm not going to be internationalist, I'm not going to be fraternal, and I'm going to keep it to myself. And the pattern feeds on itself.
Well, that's a real, I guess, problem with our species. So we have these hardwired predispositions for jealousy, for, the 7 deadly sins, control, dominance, exaltation, the desire to be exalted past other beings. And if you're if I could say it this way, you're a little dog for whatever your life circumstances are. Maybe you've been, would be a common story. You've been abused and things have been put upon you, and then finally circumstances raise you up. The sense of balance and restraint for a person that finds either he or her in in a new situation where they now have power, and there's a grudge against the other former ruling group or dominant group, then that's going to play itself out as some kind of restrictive response, and the one group is not going to accept that. They're going to say, well, we've done all this, and we've tried to right the arrangement that happened in the past, but people are often, it's very difficult for them to forgive and to act in an equal fashion. I would say that it's very tough, very hard to do that, and I think everywhere around the world these tensions continue to exist, made worse, I think, by the in many ways decline of religion. One great cloak which can enshroud our species or some kind of religious relationships and desires to act in as God would have us act, phrase it that way. And if everyone if that's been taken away, and the motivating factors are just baser impulses, then it's a very difficult situation, isn't it? I mean, if the Chinese, presumably I'll talk about the Chinese. You could make many other analogies. The Chinese are great. They're 1.4 billion. They've got all these wonderful things. In an ancient world, they've got this, they've got that. But from the Chinese point of view, they could say, look what the West has done to us. They, when we were weak, they came in and we had the opium wars. They forced us to consume opium. Imagine that. Somebody just think of it. We're here, the Chinese are trying to make some money on the deal, and they come in and they say, I want everybody here to take opium. I'm going to bring huge piles of it in. And if the government, a weak government, said, no, we don't want our citizens to become opium addicts, we'll fight you, and then they won, and then they forced this upon people. They took big areas, they mocked whatever, and then it might be the Chinese viewpoint in a way, is the Japanese were sort of part of this conspiracy against them. And yes. Then I think the devastation of World War II is certainly not forgotten. I mean, it's just incredibly terrible things happened. And in any event, so family, after all these terrible events, and then famine, death, war, whatever it is, and then finally China's become powerful and strong and united. Are they going to be good partners? Or
is it time for payback?
They might be. Are they intelligent enough and forgiving enough to do something?
And that's the thing. And if you look at some of the great visionaries in history, we mentioned Mother Teresa earlier, Martin Luther King Jr., and they argue it has to stop somewhere. The cycle has to be broken, and who is going to step up and do that? And will that be enough ultimately to overcome the sense of tribalism? Stay tuned.
Well, Bucky, this is a pretty good discussion, I think, and we've traced out some of the words that the French Revolution spawned, and it's been a good interchange. So thank you for coming. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves. Endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.